A millionaire gave $200 to a pregnant beggar and was paralyzed when he saw her pendant. It was the same as his lovers who died 20 years ago. Liam Turner walked through the bustling streets of Charleston, his mind drifting to memories he could never quite escape. The cool morning air carried the scent of salt from the harbor, and the gentle hum of life around him blended into a soothing background noise. It was a day like any other, yet there was a heaviness in his chest, a familiar ache that had settled there 20 years ago and never left. His hands were tucked into the pockets of his coat, his gaze distant, as if searching for something long lost. He often found himself wandering aimlessly, hoping that a walk might clear his head, but it never did. Charleston was filled with reminders of Elizabeth, the love of his life who had been taken from him in a tragic accident 2 decades ago. Her laughter seemed to echo off the cobblestones, her smile hidden in the shadows of the old buildings. Even now, after all these years, he could still see her standing on the corner, waiting for him, wearing that delicate silver heart pendant he had given her when they first fell in love. As he crossed another intersection, something caught his eye, a commotion near the curb. A young woman, clearly distressed, and was arguing with a taxi driver. The man was shaking his head, gesturing to the meter as the woman frantically fumbled with a worn-out purse. Liam hesitated, debating whether to get involved. But when he saw her turn away from the driver with a defeated look, something pulled him closer. "Look, I can't give you a ride if you can't pay," the driver said, clearly exasperated. "I've got other fares to pick up." "I understand, but please," the woman's voice cracked, her eyes glistening with tears. "I'll find a way to pay. I just need to get to the shelter." Liam's heart tightened. She was pregnant, her hands protectively cradling her swollen belly, and there was a desperation in her voice that he couldn't ignore. Without a second thought, he stepped forward and tapped the driver on the shoulder. "Here," he said, pulling out a couple of $100 bills from his wallet. "This should cover it. Make sure she gets where she needs to go." The driver's eyes widened, and he quickly snatched the money, nodding gratefully before heading back to his car. "Thank you, sir. I'll take care of it." Liam turned to the young woman, offering a gentle smile. "Are you all right?" For a moment, she just stared at him, clearly caught off guard by the unexpected kindness. I don't know how to thank you," she said, her voice barely a whisper. "I'm sorry. I shouldn't have made a scene." "It's okay," Liam said softly. "I'm glad I could help." He was about to turn away, but then something glinted around her neck, catching his attention. It was a simple silver chain with a small heart-shaped pendant dangling from it. His breath caught in his throat as he recognized the design immediately. It was the same pendant he had given Elizabeth all those years ago. Where did you get that?" he stammered, unable to hide the shock in his voice. The question came out more abruptly than he intended, and the woman recoiled slightly, clutching the pendant as if to shield it from him. "This?" She glanced down at the necklace, confused. "It was my mother's. It's the only thing I have left of her. Why?" Liam's mind was spinning, his thoughts colliding in a chaotic mess. Your mother. What was her name? Elizabeth, she said, and the name sent a jolt through his entire body, like an electric shock. But she left when I was just a baby. I never really knew her. He felt as if the ground had shifted beneath his feet, as if the world around him had suddenly become unfamiliar. It couldn't be a coincidence. The name, the pendant, it all pointed to one impossible truth. Elizabeth, he repeated, almost to himself. I need to ask, do you know what happened to her? The woman's eyes darkened, and she shook her head. No, I only know what I was told, that she died, or at least that's what they think. But I don't have any details. Why are you asking all of this? Liam's mouth went dry and he struggled to find the right words. How could he explain to this stranger that he was, perhaps, the key to unlocking a mystery that had haunted him for 2 decades? I'm sorry. It's just, I knew someone named Elizabeth. She She meant a lot to me. He could hardly breathe, the weight of unspoken memories pressing down on him. The young woman, Alice, as he would learn later, looked at him with a mix of curiosity and suspicion. "I'm not sure how my mother could be connected to you, but if you knew her, maybe you could tell me something I don't know. I've always had so many questions, and no one's ever given me answers." Liam hesitated, torn between the fear of reopening old wounds and the possibility of finally finding closure. "Maybe we can help each other," he said quietly. "If you're willing to talk, I'd like to hear more about her, and maybe I can share what I know." Alice studied him for a moment, as if trying to decide whether she could trust him. Finally, she nodded. "All right. I don't know where this will lead, but I'll talk." "Good," Liam replied, feeling a strange mix of hope and anxiety building inside him. "Let's start by finding a place where we can sit and talk. There's a cafe just down the street, my treat." As they walked side by side, Liam couldn't help but glance at the pendant again, its silver surface gleaming in the morning light. For the first time in years, he felt a flicker of something he had long thought extinguished. Hope. But with it came a rush of questions, doubts, and fears that he knew would not be easily answered. As Liam and Alice settled into a quiet corner of the cafe, the soft murmur of conversations around them created a cocoon of calm. Liam ordered 2 coffees, though he wasn't sure if either of them would actually drink. His hands trembled slightly as he clasped them together on the table, stealing glances at the pendant around Alice's neck. Each time he saw it, a wave of memories washed over him, threatening to pull him under. For a moment, there was silence between them, heavy and awkward. Alice toyed with the pendant absent-mindedly, her eyes darting around the room as if searching for a way to escape. Liam took a deep breath, forcing himself to speak. "I suppose I should start by explaining why I reacted the way I did, back there, with the taxi." Alice looked up, her expression softening a bit. "It's okay. I mean, I could tell it meant something to you, but I don't understand why." Liam's eyes softened as he gazed at the pendant, his mind drifting back 20 years. "That pendant, I gave it to someone a long time ago, someone very special to me." He paused, as if the words themselves were fragile and could break. Her name was Elizabeth. Alice's brow furrowed, and she leaned in, curiosity mingling with caution. "You mean my mother?" "Yes," Liam whispered, the word barely audible. "I met her when I was young, and we fell in love. She was everything to me. We planned a life together. But then there was an accident, and I was told she didn't survive." His voice cracked, and he had to take a moment to steady himself. "I spent years grieving, believing that she was gone." The cafe seemed to fade away as Liam's mind was transported to a different time. He could still see her as she was then, standing by the waterfront with the wind in her hair, laughing as the waves crashed against the pier. He remembered the way she would hold his hand, her fingers warm and gentle, as if nothing in the world could come between them. And that smile, it had lit up his entire world. He had given her the pendant on their first anniversary. It was simple, yet elegant. A silver heart that matched the one he felt beating in his chest whenever he was near her. She had worn it every day, and every time he saw it, he was reminded of how lucky he was to have her by his side. The day of the accident, it had vanished along with her, leaving him with nothing but memories and questions that had never been answered. Liam's eyes glazed over as he recalled the moments they had shared, the plans they had made. They had talked about getting married, starting a family, building a life together. But all of it had been ripped away in a single moment, leaving a void that he had never managed to fill. "I couldn't believe it when I saw the pendant around your neck," Liam said, his voice raw with emotion. "It was like seeing a ghost. I didn't understand how it could be, how you could have it." Alice listened intently, her expression softening as she realized the depth of his pain. She had spent her whole life wondering about her mother, clinging to the pendant as the only piece of her she had left. To hear that it had once been a symbol of love between two people was almost too much to process. "I never knew," she said quietly. "No one ever told me much about her. All I know is that she disappeared when I was a baby, and I was raised by someone else. They always said she was gone, but they never gave me details." Liam's heart ached at her words. He had spent 2 decades mourning Elizabeth. And now, sitting across from him was the daughter he never knew existed, holding the same piece of silver that had once symbolized everything he held dear. "I don't know what happened to her," he said, his voice barely steady. "But I need to find out. And if there's even the slightest chance that she's still out there, I have to try." Alice looked down at her coffee, her hands clasped around the warm cup. She didn't know why she had agreed to talk to this stranger, but there was something about the way he spoke, the way he looked at her, that made her feel a connection she couldn't explain. "I don't know if I can help," she said, finally lifting her gaze to meet his. "But if you want to find out the truth, I'm willing to try. I've always had questions too. Maybe together we can get some answers." A sense of relief washed over Liam, though it was tinged with apprehension. For the first time in years, he felt a flicker of hope, but it was fragile, and he feared that chasing it might lead to even more heartache. Still, he couldn't ignore the possibility that had been placed in front of him. "Thank you," he said softly. "I know this must be overwhelming for you, but I promise, whatever we find, I'll be here. I won't let you face it alone." Alice nodded, her eyes reflecting a mix of uncertainty and resolve. "I'm scared," she admitted, her voice trembling. "I don't know what we'll find, but I want to know who she was. I want to know why she left." "We'll find out," Liam said, his words firm but gentle. "Whatever it takes." They sat in silence for a few moments, the enormity of the situation settling in. For Liam, it was as if a door that had been locked for 2 decades had finally cracked open, revealing a glimpse of a past he thought was lost forever. And yet, he knew that whatever lay on the other side was something he would have to face head-on, no matter how painful it might be. As they left the cafe, the sun had begun to set, casting a warm, golden light over the streets of Charleston. Liam walked alongside Alice, their footsteps echoing softly on the pavement. For the first time in years, he felt like he was walking towards something instead of running away from it. But as much as he wanted to believe that this journey would bring closure, a nagging voice in the back of his mind reminded him that the truth could be far more complicated than he was prepared to face. The next morning, Liam found himself pacing back and forth in his office, his thoughts still tangled in the events of the previous day. He had barely slept, his mind racing with the possibilities of what he might uncover. There was a time when he had given up on answers, resigning himself to a lifetime of not knowing what truly happened to Elizabeth. But now, with Alice in the picture, he couldn't help but feel a spark of hope reignite within him. Liam had arranged to meet Alice later that afternoon. After their conversation at the cafe, he knew there was so much more they needed to discuss, and he wanted to approach this carefully. The last thing he wanted was to overwhelm her or push too hard, but he also couldn't afford to let this opportunity slip away. It was a delicate balance, and he needed to be mindful of how he proceeded. When he arrived at the cafe where they had agreed to meet, Alice was already there, sitting by the window with a cup of tea. She looked calmer than she had the previous day, but there was still a tension in her posture, a guardedness that Liam could understand. She had been living her life with questions that no one had bothered to answer. And now, here was a man claiming to hold pieces of a puzzle she didn't even know existed. "Hi," she said, offering him a small smile as he approached. "I'm glad you came." "I'm glad you're here too," Liam replied, taking a seat across from her. "I wasn't sure if you'd want to meet again after everything I said yesterday." Alice hesitated, then shrugged. It was a lot to take in, but I think I want to know more. If there's even a chance you knew my mom. then maybe this is my chance to finally understand what happened. I've spent my whole life with these gaps, missing pieces that no one could ever fill. If you can help me find those answers, then I'm willing to try." Her words were cautious, but there was a determination behind them that Liam admired. He could see the strength she had developed from facing so many uncertainties, and it made him even more determined to help her. "I'll do everything I can," he said sincerely. "But to be honest, I don't have all the answers yet. I need to find out more about what happened, and that means we might have to dig into some difficult truths." "I'm ready," Alice said, her voice steady but soft. "I've spent so long not knowing anything about her. I think I can handle whatever we find." Liam nodded, reassured by her resolve. "The first thing I'd like to do is learn more about you. You mentioned that you were raised by someone else who took care of you after Elizabeth was gone." Alice's expression grew somber as she thought back. "I was raised by a woman named Mrs. Hawthorne. She ran a small foster home on the outskirts of the city. She wasn't warm, exactly, but she made sure we were taken care of. I stayed there until I was old enough to move out on my own. I never knew my father, and no one ever talked about my mom. They just told me she was gone, and that was it." Liam's heart ached at the thought of Alice growing up without the love and care she deserved. He had always pictured Elizabeth as a mother, kind, gentle, protective. If Elizabeth had been forced to abandon her child, there must have been a powerful reason behind it, something beyond what Liam could fathom. "Did Mrs. Hawthorne ever say anything about your mother? Any details at all?" Alice shook her head. "Not really. She always seemed uncomfortable whenever I asked. The only thing I have is this necklace. She gave it to me when I was old enough to ask about my mom, and she said it was the only thing my mom left behind." Liam's mind raced, trying to piece together what little information he had. "Do you know where Mrs. Hawthorne is now? Maybe she could tell us more?" "I think she still lives in the same house," Alice said. "But I haven't seen her in years. I don't know if she'd be willing to talk." "It's worth a try," Liam said. "I could go with you, if that would make it easier." Alice seemed to consider this for a moment, then nodded. "All right, I'll call her and see if she's willing to meet. Maybe if I tell her you were a friend of my mom's, she'll open up." "Good," Liam said, relief washing over him. "And Alice, if at any point you feel uncomfortable or want to stop, just say the word. This is about finding answers, but it's also about making sure you're okay." She looked at him, her eyes reflecting a mix of gratitude and uncertainty. "Thank you. I mean it. You're the first person who's actually tried to help me understand all of this, and I don't even know why you care." Liam hesitated, unsure of how much to reveal. "Because if your mother was Elizabeth, then you're someone I care about, too," he said finally. "I can't explain it, but I feel like I owe it to both of you to find the truth." Alice didn't respond immediately, but he could see the wheels turning in her mind. She was trying to process everything, and he knew it would take time. But at least they were taking the first steps together, and that was something. As they left the cafe, Liam felt a sense of purpose that had been absent from his life for so long. He had spent years lost in grief, unable to move forward, but now, for the first time, he had a direction. The road ahead was uncertain, and he knew there would be obstacles, but the chance to finally find closure, or perhaps even to reconnect with a part of Elizabeth, was enough to make him brave the unknown. Later that evening, after they had parted ways, Liam found himself standing in his study, looking at an old photograph of Elizabeth. It was taken on the pier, on one of their many afternoons spent by the water. She was laughing, her eyes bright with happiness, the pendant glinting in the sunlight. He hadn't been able to look at that picture for years, but now he held it in his hands, hoping it would guide him as he ventured back into the past. "Elizabeth," he whispered, tracing the outline of her smile with his thumb. "If you're out there, if there's even a chance, I'll find out what happened." I promise. The next day, he received a message from Alice. Mrs. Hawthorne had agreed to meet with them, though she had sounded hesitant over the phone. As he read the message, Liam felt his pulse quicken. They were about to take the first real step toward uncovering the truth, and he was both eager and terrified of what they might find. The drive to Mrs. Hawthorne's house was quiet, filled with an underlying tension that neither Liam nor Alice wanted to address just yet. Liam kept glancing over at Alice, trying to read her expression, but she stared out the window, lost in thought. He could sense the apprehension in her, and it was hard to blame her. She was about to confront a part of her past she had long given up trying to understand. Mrs. Hawthorne's house was on the outskirts of Charleston, a modest, old-fashioned home that seemed slightly out of place among the newer developments that had cropped up around it over the years. It was a quaint two-story building with a small front porch and faded white paint that gave it a sense of quiet dignity. As Liam parked the car, he noticed Alice take a deep breath, her hands clenching slightly in her lap. "You okay?" he asked gently. She nodded, though her eyes betrayed her nervousness. "Yeah, I haven't been back here in a long time. It feels weird, like I'm stepping into a different life." Liam offered a reassuring smile. "We don't have to do this if you're not ready." "No," she said more firmly this time. "I want to do this. I need to." With that, they got out of the car and made their way up the steps to the front door. Before they could knock, the door creaked open, revealing an older woman with sharp eyes and a stern expression. Mrs. Hawthorne hadn't changed much from what Alice remembered, still carrying that air of no-nonsense authority, her graying hair pulled back into a tight bun. "Alice," Mrs. Hawthorne said, her tone a mix of surprise and suspicion. "It's been a while." "Hi, Mrs. Hawthorne," Alice replied, forcing a smile. I hope it's okay that we're here. This is Liam. He knew my mom." Mrs. Hawthorne's eyes flickered to Liam, and he saw a flash of recognition, or was it apprehension, in her gaze. "I see," she said curtly. "Come in, then." The inside of the house was just as Liam had imagined, neat, orderly, and filled with the kind of furniture that had clearly been there for decades. There were no frills or decorations, just practical items arranged with care. Mrs. Hawthorne led them to a small sitting room and gestured for them to take a seat. "I don't usually get visitors from the past," she said, her tone cautious. "So, Alice, what brings you here after all this time?" Alice hesitated, glancing at Liam for support. I need to know more about my mom, about Elizabeth." Mrs. Hawthorne's face hardened slightly, as if she had been expecting this question but hoped it would never be asked. "What is there to know? She's been gone for a long time. Best to leave it at that." "I can't," Alice said, her voice more insistent. "I need to know what happened. You told me she left, but you never said why, and now I found someone who might be able to help me understand." Mrs. Hawthorne's gaze shifted to Liam, studying him as if trying to discern his intentions. "You said you knew Elizabeth?" "Yes," Liam said, leaning forward. She was everything to me. We were going to start a life together, but then I was told she died in an accident. And now, I see Alice with the pendant I gave her, and I need to understand how that happened." For a moment, there was only silence. Mrs. Hawthorne's eyes softened, and she seemed to age right in front of them, as if the weight of the years had finally caught up to her. "I suppose it was only a matter of time before this all came back," she murmured. "Elizabeth, she was a complicated woman, strong, but caught in something bigger than herself." Liam's heart pounded as he sensed a breakthrough. "What do you mean?" Mrs. Hawthorne sighed, settling back into her chair. "Elizabeth didn't die in an accident. That much I can tell you. But she was in danger. Real danger. There were people after her, and she had to make a choice. She thought the only way to protect her daughter was to disappear. Alice's eyes widened, her hands trembling as she clutched the pendant. "She left because of me." "No, child," Mrs. Hawthorne said, her tone gentler than before. "She left to protect you. She had no choice. There were people who would have used you to get to her, and she couldn't bear the thought of you getting hurt because of her past." Liam felt a chill run down his spine. Who were these people? "Powerful people," Mrs. Hawthorne replied, choosing her words carefully. "People who didn't want certain secrets to come to light. I don't know all the details, but I do know that Elizabeth was involved in something dangerous. Something she didn't want to be a part of anymore, but couldn't escape." The room seemed to close in around them, the gravity of her words sinking in. Liam struggled to process what he was hearing. For years, he had believed Elizabeth's death was a tragic accident. Now, it was clear that there was so much more to the story, something dark and sinister that had forced her into hiding. "Why didn't you tell me this before?" Alice asked, her voice breaking. "Why didn't you tell me the truth?" Mrs. Hawthorne's eyes softened with a mix of regret and resignation. "Because it wouldn't have changed anything. You were just a child. What good would it have done to burden you with all of this? I thought it was best if you just lived your life without that shadow hanging over you." "But I deserve to know," Alice said, her eyes brimming with tears. "I spent my whole life wondering why she left, if she even loved me." "She did," Mrs. Hawthorne said firmly. "More than anything. That's why she did what she did. To keep you safe." Liam reached out and placed a comforting hand on Alice's shoulder. He could see how much this was affecting her, and he understood her pain all too well. "We need to know more," he said, his voice steady. "If Elizabeth was running from something, there has to be a way to find out what it was. I can't just walk away from this." Mrs. Hawthorne hesitated, then slowly nodded. "There's someone you should talk to. A man named Robert who used to know Elizabeth. He might have more answers than I do. But be careful. There's a reason she tried to keep you away from all of this." Liam and Alice exchanged a glance, a silent agreement passing between them. They had to follow this lead, no matter where it took them. "Thank you, Mrs. Hawthorne," Liam said, rising to his feet. "We'll be careful." As they left the house, the sun was beginning to dip below the horizon, casting long shadows across the lawn. Liam felt a sense of urgency building within him. They were closer to the truth, but he knew that whatever they were about to uncover would not come without a price. Still, he had come too far to turn back now. He glanced over at Alice, who was wiping her eyes, and gave her a reassuring nod. "We'll find out the truth," he said. "I promise." Alice took a deep breath, her expression resolute. "Then let's find Robert. I'm ready." The following morning, Liam and Alice sat across from each other at a small diner, the aroma of fresh coffee mingling with the soft chatter of other patrons. They had spent the night going over everything Mrs. Hawthorne had told them, trying to make sense of it all. Now, they were preparing to take the next step, finding Robert, the man who might have more answers. Liam had made a few calls earlier that morning and managed to track down Robert's address. He was living on the outskirts of the city, in a quiet neighborhood that seemed far removed from the turmoil of the past they were trying to uncover. As they finished their breakfast, Alice looked up at Liam, her eyes still clouded with uncertainty but also with a newfound resolve. "Do you think he'll talk to us?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "I hope so," Liam replied, trying to sound confident. If he knew Elizabeth, then he might be the key to understanding why all of this happened. But we have to be prepared for whatever we might learn. It could be difficult. Alice nodded, her hands tightening around her coffee cup. "I'm ready. I just want to know the truth." A short drive later, they found themselves standing outside a modest, single-story house with a small garden in the front. The curtains were drawn, and there was no sign of activity inside. Liam hesitated for a moment before knocking on the door, his heart pounding in his chest. He had no idea what to expect, but he knew they were running out of time and options. After a few tense seconds, the door creaked open, and a man in his late 50s appeared, his graying hair neatly combed back. His eyes flickered with recognition when he saw Liam, but there was also a guardedness that suggested he wasn't thrilled about the visit. "Robert," Liam asked cautiously. "I'm Liam Turner. I believe you knew Elizabeth Rhodes." Robert's expression hardened at the mention of the name, and he glanced at Alice, as if trying to assess who she was. "I haven't heard that name in a long time," he said, his voice low. "Why are you here?" "We're trying to find out what happened to her," Liam said, choosing his words carefully. "Mrs. Hawthorne said you might be able to help us." For a moment, Robert didn't respond. Then, he sighed and stepped aside, gesturing for them to come in. "All right, I suppose you'd better come in." The inside of Robert's house was sparse but tidy, with shelves lined with old books and a few framed photographs on the walls. He led them to a small living room and offered them a seat, before settling down across from them. There was a sense of resignation in his posture, as if he had been expecting this conversation for years. "I don't know how much Mrs. Hawthorne told you," he began. "But whatever you think you know, it's probably just the tip of the iceberg." Liam leaned forward, his eyes focused intently on Robert. "We were told that Elizabeth didn't die in an accident." Finally, he took a deep breath. "Elizabeth was mixed up in something dangerous. I'm not talking about a minor dispute or a bad decision. She got involved with people who had a lot of power and weren't afraid to use it. At first, she didn't realize how deep it went, but by the time she did, it was too late to get out." Liam's stomach churned as he listened, his mind racing with questions. What kind of people are we talking about? Robert's eyes darkened. Businessmen, politicians, people with connections and money, they had a lot to lose, and they didn't care who got hurt as long as they protected their interests. Elizabeth got caught up in it because she was trying to do the right thing. She found out something she wasn't supposed to, and they came after her. "What did she find out?" Alice asked, her voice trembling. "She found out that the company she was working for at the time was involved in illegal dealings, money laundering, fraud, you name it," Robert explained. "She was supposed to be helping with their accounting, but she stumbled across evidence that could have brought the whole operation down. She tried to report it, but they got to her before she could." Liam's hands clenched into fists. "Are you saying they tried to kill her?" "They threatened her, made it clear that if she didn't back off, she wouldn't live to see another day," Robert said grimly. "But they didn't just threaten her, they threatened to hurt anyone close to her. And that's when she realized they weren't bluffing." Alice's face was pale, her eyes wide with shock. "So she left to protect me?" "Yes," Robert said softly. "She knew they would use you to get to her, and she couldn't bear the thought of that. So she did the only thing she could think of. She disappeared, faked her own death, and went into hiding." Liam's mind reeled as he tried to process everything. "But why didn't she come to me? Why didn't she tell me what was happening?" "Because she thought it would be safer if you didn't know," Robert replied. "She was trying to protect you, too. She thought if you believed she was dead, they wouldn't have a reason to come after you." There was a heavy silence as the weight of Robert's words sank in. Liam could feel his heart breaking all over again, the pain of losing Elizabeth resurfacing with a new intensity. She had been alive all this time, and she had been suffering alone, trying to keep everyone she loved safe. "What happened to her after that?" Alice asked, her voice barely audible. "Did she ever come back?" Robert shook his head. "No. She stayed hidden, moving from place to place, always looking over her shoulder. I tried to help her as much as I could, but there was only so much I could do. The last time I heard from her was about 10 years ago. After that, she just disappeared. I don't know if she's still out there, but if she is, she's probably still hiding." Liam felt a surge of determination, mixed with a profound sadness. "I have to find her," he said, his voice resolute. I have to know if she's still alive, and if those people are still out there, I need to make sure they can't hurt her or anyone else ever again. Robert met his gaze, and for the first time, Liam saw a flicker of hope in his eyes. If anyone can find her, it's you. But be careful, Liam. These people, they don't play by the rules. If you start digging, they'll know. And they won't hesitate to make you disappear, too. I'm not afraid, Liam said, his jaw set. I lost her once. I won't lose her again. Alice reached over and took Liam's hand, her grip firm. Then let's find her. Together. The drive back from Robert's house was quieter than before, but this time it wasn't because of uncertainty. It was because of the gravity of the revelations they had just uncovered. Liam's mind was a storm of thoughts, each more pressing than the last, but at the center of it all was a singular, unshakable resolve. He had to find Elizabeth. The truth that she had been alive, out there somewhere all these years, gave him hope, but it also stirred a deep, painful regret. He could have done something, but he didn't even know she needed help. Alice was equally lost in thought, staring out the window as the city lights began to flicker on around them. Her world had been turned upside down. She had grown up believing her mother was gone, a distant, hazy memory. And now she was grappling with the fact that Elizabeth had sacrificed everything to protect her. It was a truth that brought comfort and heartache in equal measure. As they pulled up in front of Liam's office building, Alice turned to him, breaking the silence. What do we do now? We keep going, Liam said, his voice steady. We find out where she was hiding, who she might have been in contact with, and we follow every lead until we find her. I'm not giving up. Alice nodded, her expression resolute. I want to help. I need to understand who she was, why she had to make those choices. It feels like I'm finally getting to know her, even if it's just through the pieces she left behind. Liam looked at her, seeing so much of Elizabeth in her eyes. You're not alone in this, Alice. We'll figure it out together. They spent the next few days poring over old documents, photos, and anything Liam could find that might give them a clue about Elizabeth's whereabouts after she disappeared. Liam's office became their base of operations, a place where they could sort through the puzzle pieces of the past and try to make sense of it all. He brought in a private investigator he trusted, someone who could dig deeper than they could on their own. Every lead, no matter how small, was followed up on. One evening, as they were sifting through a box of old photographs, Alice pulled out a picture she hadn't seen before. It was a photo of Elizabeth standing by a lake, her smile bright, the pendant hanging delicately around her neck. She was holding a little girl's hand, Alice, no more than 3 years old. For a moment, Alice couldn't breathe. She had no memory of the day, no recollection of the moment captured in the picture. But there it was, a glimpse of a time when everything was still okay, when she had her mother by her side. Where did this come from? Alice asked, her voice trembling. Liam took the photograph from her, his eyes softening as he recognized Elizabeth's radiant smile. I don't know. I think it was sent to me a few months after the accident. I never understood why someone would send it, and I didn't know who had taken it. I thought maybe it was a cruel joke, someone trying to make me relive everything. Alice's hands shook as she traced the edges of the photo. She looks so happy, she whispered. We both do. She loved you, Liam said softly, his voice filled with a certainty he hadn't felt in a long time. I can see it in her eyes. Whatever happened, whatever made her leave, it wasn't because she didn't care. She was protecting you. For a long moment, Alice didn't say anything. She just stared at the photograph, trying to connect the dots between the past and the present, between the mother she never got to know and the woman who had loved her enough to disappear. I want to find out who sent this, she said finally. If someone knew enough to send this to you, maybe they know more about where she went. That's a good idea, Liam agreed. I'll have our investigator look into it, but I think there's something else we need to do too. Alice looked up at him, waiting for him to continue. "We need to find out more about these people she was running from," Liam said. "If she was involved in something illegal, there must be records, evidence, something that can lead us to them. And if we can find them, we might be able to find out where she went." Alice's stomach churned at the thought. The idea of diving deeper into her mother's dangerous past was terrifying, but she knew it was necessary. What if they're still out there? What if they're still looking for her? Or for me? Liam's eyes darkened, and he reached out to take her hand, his grip firm and reassuring. "Then we'll make sure they can't hurt you. I've lost her once, and I'm not going to lose you too. Whatever it takes, we'll find a way to keep you safe." There was a strength in his voice that gave Alice a sense of security she hadn't felt in a long time. She nodded, squeezing his hand back. "Okay, let's do it." Over the next few days, they delved deeper into the investigation, focusing on the company Elizabeth had worked for before her disappearance. It was an international corporation with connections to several high-profile industries, and as they dug, they began to uncover a pattern of financial irregularities and shady deals that matched Robert's description. It was becoming clear that Elizabeth had stumbled onto something big, something that could have destroyed powerful people if it had come to light. One evening, as they were reviewing some of the information the investigator had gathered, Liam received a phone call. He stepped outside to take it, and when he returned, his expression was grim. "The investigator found something," he said. "A name. Someone who used to work for the company and might have been involved in covering up the illegal activities. They're still in town, and I think we should talk to them." Alice felt a jolt of anxiety, but also a flicker of hope. "Do you think they'll know where she is?" "I don't know," Liam admitted. "But it's a lead, and right now, we need all the leads we can get." The next day, they arranged to meet the contact at a small, discreet cafe on the edge of town. It was the kind of place where people could talk without drawing attention, and Liam wanted to be cautious. They didn't know who they were dealing with, and the last thing he wanted was to put Alice in danger. As they waited, Liam looked over at Alice, who was nervously tapping her fingers on the table. "Are you okay?" "I'm scared," she confessed. "But I need to do this. I need to know." Liam reached out and placed a reassuring hand on hers. "We'll get through this, together." When the contact finally arrived, it was a middle-aged man with a weary, cautious look. He introduced himself as Mark, and it was clear from the way he carried himself that he was wary of their questions. Liam wasted no time, explaining that they were looking for information about Elizabeth and why she had disappeared. Mark hesitated, his gaze flickering between Liam and Alice. "I don't know if I should be talking about this," he said. "It's dangerous. People have gotten hurt. Worse." Liam's expression was calm but firm. "We're not looking to expose anyone. We just want to find her, please." Mark studied them for a moment, then sighed. "All right, I'll tell you what I know, but you didn't hear it from me." Elizabeth was in way over her head. She found out about the money laundering, but it was more than that. They were using shell companies to move money for some very powerful people. People who would do anything to keep their secrets. When she tried to bring it up, they made it clear that if she didn't disappear, she'd end up like the others who got in their way. Alice's heart sank, and she felt a chill run down her spine. "Do you know where she went?" Mark shook his head. "No, but I know she had help. Someone from the inside helped her disappear, but I never found out who it was. If she's still alive, that person might be the only one who knows where she is." As they left the cafe, Liam and Alice were quiet, both processing the new information. It was a lead, but it also raised more questions. Who was helping Elizabeth, and why? And if they could find that person, would it lead them to her? They didn't have all the answers yet, but they were getting closer. And for the first time, Liam felt a glimmer of hope that maybe, just maybe, they would find Elizabeth. And with her, the closure he had been searching for all these years. The sun had barely risen when Liam's phone buzzed on the nightstand, waking him from a restless sleep. It was a message from Alice, asking if they could meet earlier than planned. She didn't say why, but he could sense the urgency behind her words. Within an hour, They were both sitting in his office, their faces lit by the soft glow of the morning light filtering through the blinds. "I've been thinking a lot about what Mark told us," Alice said, her voice steady but filled with tension. "About how someone from the inside might have helped my mom. If we can find out who that was, it could lead us to her, or at least help us understand why she had to disappear." Liam nodded, his mind already racing through possible avenues to explore. "You're right. We need to follow that lead. It's risky, but it might be our best shot." Over the past few days, their investigation had been gaining momentum, but it had also brought a heightened sense of danger. The deeper they dug, the more they realized that Elizabeth's past was tangled in a web of deceit and power, with players who would go to any lengths to protect their secrets. Yet, despite the risks, neither of them could bring themselves to stop. For Liam, it was a quest for closure, and for Alice, it was a desperate need to understand her mother's choices. "I've been looking through some old documents and records from the company where she worked," Alice continued. "There are some names that keep coming up, but there's one in particular that stands out. Daniel Fisher." Liam's brow furrowed. "Who is he?" "According to the records, he was a senior executive at the company around the time my mom was there," Alice explained. "But here's the thing. Shortly after she disappeared, he resigned and moved out of the country. It's like he vanished off the face of the earth." Liam's eyes narrowed as he processed the information. "You think he could be the one who helped her?" "I don't know," Alice admitted, "but it seems too coincidental. I mean, why would someone in his position just disappear right after she did? Maybe he knew something, or maybe he was trying to protect her." Liam leaned back in his chair, considering their options. If he's still alive, he might be our best chance of finding out what really happened, but tracking him down won't be easy. "I thought the same thing," Alice said, a small smile forming on her lips. "So I did some digging last night, and I think I found where he is. He's living in a small town in Canada, under a different name. It took some work, but I think we can find him." Liam couldn't help but admire her determination. She had a tenacity that reminded him so much of Elizabeth, and it gave him hope that they were on the right path. "You did all that on your own?" he asked, a hint of pride in his voice. Alice shrugged, looking slightly embarrassed. "I couldn't sleep. I figured I might as well do something useful." "Well, it's more than useful," Liam said. "It's our next move. If he really did help your mother, he might be the key to everything." They wasted no time in making arrangements to travel to Canada. As they boarded the plane, Liam glanced over at Alice, who was staring out the window, her face a mixture of anxiety and anticipation. He could tell that the weight of everything was starting to take its toll on her, but she was holding up remarkably well. He reached over and squeezed her hand, offering a silent promise that they would see this through together. The small town where Daniel Fisher, now known as Peter Randall, was living was a stark contrast to the bustling city streets of Charleston. It was quiet, almost eerily so, with snow-covered streets and quaint, modest houses lining the main road. They found his address easily enough, a small cottage tucked away at the edge of town, surrounded by tall pine trees. As they approached the front door, Liam felt a knot of nervousness tighten in his chest. This could be it, the moment that brought them closer to finding Elizabeth, or the moment everything fell apart. When they knocked, there was a long pause before the door finally creaked open. A man in his 60s, with a salt and pepper beard and tired eyes, stood before them. He looked at them with a mix of caution and curiosity, clearly not expecting visitors. "Mr. Randall?" Liam said, choosing to use the name he was currently going by. "We're sorry to show up unannounced, but we need to talk to you about Elizabeth Rhodes." The man's expression changed instantly, a flicker of recognition and fear passing through his eyes. He glanced around nervously, as if expecting someone to be watching. "I don't know who you are, but you shouldn't be here," he said, his voice tense. "It's not safe." "Please," Alice said, stepping forward. "I'm her daughter. I just want to understand why she had to leave. We've been trying to piece together what happened, and we think you might be able to help us." For a moment, Peter, formerly Daniel, stared at Alice, his eyes softening as he seemed to recognize something familiar in her. He hesitated, then stepped aside, gesturing for them to come inside. "All right," he said quietly, "but we need to make this quick." Inside, the cottage was warm and cluttered, with books and papers strewn across the tables, as if he had been living in a state of constant distraction. He motioned for them to sit down, then took a seat across from them, his hands trembling slightly. "Elizabeth, she was a good person," he began, his voice barely above a whisper. "She didn't deserve what happened to her. She was trying to do the right thing, but she got caught up in something that was much bigger than she realized." "What was she involved in?" Liam asked, his voice steady, but laced with urgency. Peter sighed, rubbing his temples as if trying to relieve the pressure of long-buried memories. "She found out that the company she was working for was more than just a front. They were laundering money, yes, but they were also connected to organized crime, drug trafficking, illegal arms deals. When she tried to blow the whistle, they came down on her hard. They wanted to silence her, and they would have if she hadn't disappeared." "But how did she manage to do that?" Alice asked, her voice cracking. "How did she survive?" Peter looked at her, a sad smile on his lips. "Because I helped her," he said. "I was one of the few people she trusted, and I knew what they were capable of. I helped her fake her death and disappear. I thought it would be enough to keep her safe. But it seems like they never stopped looking." Liam felt a surge of emotion, a mix of relief and sorrow. "So she's been hiding, all this time?" "Yes," Peter said. "She moved around a lot, changed her name, tried to stay off the radar. But she never stopped thinking about you, Alice. She wanted to come back, but she was too afraid. She thought if she stayed away, you'd be safer." Alice's eyes filled with tears. "Do you know where she is now?" Peter hesitated, then shook his head. "The last time I heard from her was years ago. She was living under a different name, trying to start over. But I don't know if she's still there. I'm sorry. I wish I could give you more." Liam's heart ached as he looked at Alice, who was struggling to hold back her tears. "You've given us more than we had before," he said to Peter. "Thank you." Peter nodded, but his expression was somber. "If you're planning to find her, be careful. The people she was running from, they haven't forgotten. If they catch wind that someone's looking for her, they'll come after you too." "We'll be careful," Liam promised. "But we can't stop now. We have to find her." As they left the cottage, the air outside was cold, but Liam felt a sense of warmth spreading through him. They were closer to finding Elizabeth than ever before, and for the first time, he truly believed that they might succeed. But he also knew that the road ahead was fraught with danger, and they would have to tread carefully if they wanted to make it out unscathed. The days following their meeting with Peter were a blur of activity. Liam and Alice spent hours poring over the information they had gathered, trying to piece together the puzzle of Elizabeth's past. With each new discovery, the scope of the conspiracy seemed to grow, revealing a network of powerful individuals who had gone to great lengths to hide their illegal activities. It was as if they had been peeling back layers of a dark, twisted history, and the deeper they went, the more dangerous it became. Liam's private investigator had continued to dig, and he had managed to uncover a few more details about the company Elizabeth worked for. It was a legitimate business on the surface, but beneath that facade, it was connected to a series of offshore accounts and shell corporations, all used to funnel money through a complex web of transactions. These were the kinds of things Elizabeth must have stumbled upon, evidence that could have brought down some very powerful people. Alice was sitting at Liam's desk, her eyes scanning through a stack of documents. "It's all so intricate," she said, her voice tinged with frustration. "How did she even begin to figure all this out? There are hundreds of names, different companies. It's like they built a labyrinth just to confuse anyone who tried to look too closely." "She was smart," Liam said, glancing over her shoulder. and she was determined. Once she realized what was happening, she probably couldn't let it go. That's why they had to silence her. But if they were so determined to keep her quiet, how did she manage to escape? Alice asked, her brow furrowing. Why didn't they find her? Because she had help, Liam reminded her. Peter wasn't the only one, I'm sure of it. There had to be others, people who knew what was going on but didn't want to be a part of it. Maybe even people who wanted to take them down. Alice nodded, but her mind was still spinning. I just wish we could figure out who those people were. If we could find them, maybe they could lead us to her. As they continued to sift through the papers, Liam's phone buzzed. It was the investigator. I've got something, the man said, his voice crackling over the speaker. I've been following the trail and I found a name that keeps popping up. Martin Caldwell. He's not listed as an executive, but he's been involved in a lot of the transactions. It looks like he might have been the one managing the money. Do you think he's still involved? Liam asked, his pulse quickening. I'd bet on it, the investigator replied. And if he is, then he knows more than he's letting on. I did a little digging. Turns out he's still living in Charleston. If you want answers, he might be the one to talk to. Liam exchanged a glance with Alice. We need to see him, he said, making the decision almost immediately. If he was involved, he might know where Elizabeth is, or at least who else was helping her. They arranged to meet Martin Caldwell at his office later that evening. Liam was careful to keep their approach discreet. The last thing he wanted was to tip off anyone who might still be keeping tabs on Elizabeth's past. As they arrived at the sleek, glass-fronted building where Caldwell worked, Liam could feel the tension building. This was it, another step closer to the truth, but also a step deeper into dangerous territory. Caldwell's office was on the top floor, a sprawling space with floor-to-ceiling windows that offered a stunning view of the city. When they entered, they were greeted by a man in his late 50s, impeccably dressed, with a calm, composed demeanor that did little to hide the sharpness in his eyes. He gestured for them to sit, a polite but distant smile on his face. I must admit, I was surprised to receive your request, Caldwell said, leaning back in his chair. It's not often I have visitors who are interested in ancient history. Liam didn't waste any time. We're looking for Elizabeth Rhodes. We believe you might have information about her disappearance. Caldwell's expression didn't change, but there was a flicker of something in his eyes. Surprise, perhaps, or maybe recognition. Elizabeth Rhodes, he repeated, as if tasting the name. It's been a long time since I heard that name. What makes you think I would know anything about her? Because we know she discovered something illegal, Liam said, his tone firm. And we know you were involved. If you were part of what she uncovered, then you have a reason to help us find her. For a moment, Caldwell simply stared at them, his fingers drumming lightly on the armrest of his chair. You're very direct, Mr. Turner, he said finally. But I'm afraid you're mistaken. I was never directly involved in any of the activities you're suggesting. But you know who was... Alice interjected, her voice steady. And you know why she had to disappear. Please, we just want to find her. Caldwell's gaze shifted to Alice, and for a moment, his composure seemed to falter. You're her daughter, he said, almost as if to himself. I see. So that's why you're here. Yes, Alice said, her voice growing firmer. And I deserve to know why she had to leave. If you know anything, please tell us. There was a long, tense silence, and then Caldwell sighed, as if releasing a burden he had carried for far too long. Very well, he said quietly. But you need to understand. If I tell you what I know, it could put you in danger. There are people who will stop at nothing to protect their secrets. We understand, Liam said, but we need to know the truth. Caldwell leaned forward, his voice low. Elizabeth was close to uncovering a major operation, money laundering, yes, but also ties to criminal organizations across several countries. She was going to take it to the authorities, but before she could, they threatened her. She was supposed to back off, but she didn't. That's when things got Complicated." "What do you mean, complicated?" Alice asked. "They didn't just want her to disappear," Caldwell said. "They wanted to make sure no one would come looking for her. But someone in the organization, someone with a lot of pull, decided she was more valuable alive. They orchestrated her escape, made it look like she died. I don't know who it was, but they had connections, enough to keep her hidden all these years." Liam felt a chill run down his spine. "And you have no idea who this person is?" "I've heard rumors," Caldwell said, "but nothing concrete. What I can tell you is that they had a vested interest in making sure Elizabeth stayed out of sight. And if you're trying to find her now, you'll be crossing some very dangerous people." "Why are you telling us this?" Alice asked, her eyes narrowing. "Why not just deny everything and send us away?" Caldwell hesitated, and for the first time, Liam saw a crack in his polished exterior. "Because I owe her," he said softly. "Elizabeth was a good person. She was trying to do the right thing, and she got caught in something terrible. I couldn't help her then. But maybe I can help her now, by helping you." Liam took a deep breath, trying to absorb everything Caldwell had said. They were closer than ever to understanding why Elizabeth had to disappear, but the picture was far more complex and dangerous than he had imagined. "Do you have any idea where she might be now?" he asked. Caldwell shook his head. "No, but if she's still alive, she's probably still in hiding, under a different identity. If you want to find her, you'll need to be careful. The people she was running from, they're still out there, and they haven't forgotten." As they left Caldwell's office, the weight of his words hung heavy in the air. Liam could feel the danger closing in around them, but he also felt a renewed sense of purpose. They were closer to finding Elizabeth than ever before, and he wasn't going to stop until he had answers. Alice walked beside him, her expression determined despite the fear he knew she was feeling. "We're getting closer," she said quietly. "I can feel it." "Yes," Liam agreed, "but we need to be prepared for whatever comes next, because this isn't over. Not by a long shot." The drive back from Caldwell's office was silent, the air heavy with unspoken fears. Liam gripped the steering wheel tightly, his mind whirling with everything they had learned. He had expected to find answers, but he hadn't anticipated just how deep the conspiracy went, or how dangerous it still was. Caldwell's warning echoed in his mind, and for the first time, he truly understood the risks they were taking. Alice sat beside him, staring out the window, her expression thoughtful but strained. "Do you think it's true?" she asked quietly. "That there's still someone out there, watching, waiting?" Liam didn't answer right away. He didn't want to scare her, but he also couldn't lie. "I think it's possible," he said finally, "but that doesn't mean we should stop. If anything, it means we're getting close. They're scared, and they should be." Alice nodded, but there was a flicker of anxiety in her eyes. I don't want anyone else to get hurt because of this. If they're willing to go this far, then who knows what they'll do to keep their secrets." "We'll be careful," Liam assured her, though he knew it was a promise easier said than done. "But we can't let them scare us into giving up. If we do, then they've already won." For the next few days, they continued their investigation, but they did so with a new sense of caution. Liam instructed his private investigator to dig deeper, but to do it quietly without drawing attention. They couldn't afford to tip off anyone who might be watching, and they had to assume that every move they made was being monitored. It was a tense, exhausting process, but they were driven by a shared determination to uncover the truth, no matter the cost. One afternoon, as they were going over some documents at Liam's office, Alice's phone buzzed. She glanced at the screen and frowned. It's a text. From an unknown number. Liam's stomach tightened. "What does it say?" Alice hesitated, then read the message aloud. "Stop asking questions. If you don't, you'll regret it." For a moment, the room was completely silent. Then Liam reached for the phone, his expression darkening. "They're trying to scare us," he said, his voice low but steady. "But we can't let them." "What if they're serious?" Alice asked, her voice trembling. What if they're really watching us? Liam placed a reassuring hand on her shoulder. Then we'll be ready. We'll take precautions, make sure we're safe, but we can't back down now, not when we're so close. The rest of the day passed in a haze of anxiety. Liam arranged for increased security at his office and home, and he made sure that Alice was never alone. He knew that the threats were serious, and he couldn't take any chances. That night, as he lay awake in bed, he couldn't shake the feeling that they were being watched, that someone was waiting for them to make a mistake. It was a chilling thought, but it only strengthened his resolve. He had lost Elizabeth once. He wasn't going to lose Alice, too. The following morning, Liam and Alice met with the investigator, who had managed to uncover more details about the shell companies connected to Elizabeth's former employer. I found something interesting, he said, spreading out a series of documents on the table. It looks like some of these companies were still active even after Elizabeth disappeared. And there's one name that keeps showing up, someone who's been moving money between accounts, covering their tracks. Who? Liam asked, leaning in. Alan Whitmore, the investigator replied. He's a businessman, but he's got ties to some very shady organizations. If anyone knows where Elizabeth is, or who's still pulling the strings, it's him. Alice's heart skipped a beat. Do you think he was involved in making her disappear? It's possible, the investigator said, but he's also very careful. If you're planning to confront him, you need to be prepared. Liam considered this for a moment, then nodded. We need to talk to him. If he's involved, he might be the last piece of the puzzle we need. They decided to arrange a meeting with Whitmore, under the guise of discussing a potential business deal. Liam used his connections to set it up, hoping that by approaching him in a professional context, they could catch him off guard. But as the meeting drew closer, the sense of unease grew. They were walking into the lion's den, and they had no way of knowing what awaited them. The meeting was scheduled to take place at a private club in the city, a place known for its exclusivity and discretion. When Liam and Alice arrived, they were greeted by a polite but stiff concierge who escorted them to a quiet, dimly lit room. Whitmore was already there, sitting at a table with a glass of whiskey in hand, his expression calm and unreadable. Mr. Turner, he said, rising to shake Liam's hand. I've heard a lot about you. Please, sit. Liam forced a smile as he took a seat. Thank you for agreeing to meet with us. Of course, Whitmore said, though his eyes flickered with curiosity. But I have to admit, I was a bit surprised by your request. What can I do for you? Liam glanced at Alice, then back at Whitmore. We're looking for someone, Elizabeth Rhodes. The name had an immediate effect. Whitmore's calm demeanor didn't falter, but there was a slight tightening around his eyes, a subtle shift that told Liam he had hit a nerve. I'm afraid I don't know who that is, Whitmore said smoothly. Should I? You should, Alice said, her voice firm. Because you were involved with the company she worked for, and we know she discovered something that made her a target. We think you know where she went. For a moment, Whitmore said nothing. Then he leaned back in his chair, his lips curling into a faint smile. You're bold, I'll give you that, he said. But you're also playing a dangerous game. Do you have any idea who you're dealing with? We know enough, Liam said, matching Whitmore's gaze. And we're not backing down. Whitmore's smile faded, replaced by a cold, calculating expression. I see. Well, let me give you a piece of advice. Drop this. Whatever you think you're going to find, it's not worth the trouble. There are people who won't hesitate to make this go away. Permanently. Alice's hands clenched in her lap. But she didn't back down. We're not going anywhere. If you know where my mother is, you need to tell us. Whitmore's eyes narrowed, and for a moment, Liam thought he might refuse. But then, to his surprise, Whitmore sighed, as if conceding defeat. Fine. You want the truth? She's still alive, but if you're smart, you'll stop looking for her. She's better off where she is, far away from all of this. Liam's heart leapt at the confirmation. Where is she? I don't know, Whitmore said. though there was a hint of sincerity in his voice. "I helped arrange her escape, but I haven't had contact with her since. She's hiding, and she's safe. That's all you need to know." "Why did you help her?" Alice asked, confused. "If you were part of this, why would you risk everything to let her go?" "Because I owed her," Whitmore said quietly. "She saved my life once, in a way. Let's just say I was repaying the favor. But this, what you're doing, it's dangerous. And if you keep pushing, you're going to attract attention you don't want." Liam's jaw tightened. "We've come too far to stop now. We need to find her." Whitmore studied them for a moment, then nodded, as if accepting their resolve. "Then I wish you luck," he said, rising from his chair. "But remember this, if they find out you're still looking, they won't be as forgiving as I am. Be careful, Mr. Turner. And you, Miss Rhodes, take care of yourself." As they left the club, the cold night air hit them like a wave, but Liam felt a flicker of hope. They were closer than ever to finding Elizabeth, but Whitmore's warning echoed in his mind. The stakes were higher now, and they couldn't afford to make any mistakes. But no matter the cost, they would see this through. Liam and Alice stepped out of the club, their minds buzzing with everything they had just learned from Whitmore. The confirmation that Elizabeth was still alive was more than they had dared to hope for, but the man's warnings were not to be taken lightly. It was clear now that they had stirred up a hornet's nest, and whatever they did next would have to be calculated and precise. There was no room for error. As they walked to the car, Alice's phone buzzed again. She hesitated before checking the screen, half expecting another threatening message. But when she opened it, her eyes widened. It's a message from an unknown number. It says, "If you want to find her, come to the docks. Alone." Liam immediately felt a surge of protective instinct. No, it's a trap. We can't just walk into something like that. "But what if it's someone who knows where she is?" Alice argued, her voice trembling with a mix of fear and hope. "What if it's our only chance?" Liam clenched his jaw, torn between the desire to protect her and the fear that ignoring this lead might mean losing Elizabeth forever. "We'll go," he said finally, "but we're not going alone. I'll have our investigator follow from a distance, just in case. If this is a trap, we're going to be ready." The drive to the docks was tense and silent, the air thick with anticipation. Liam's mind was racing with worst-case scenarios, but he kept his focus on the road, determined not to show Alice how anxious he was. When they arrived, the area was eerily quiet, the dim glow of streetlights reflecting off the water. The docks were mostly deserted at this hour, save for a few shadows moving in the distance. As they stepped out of the car, Alice scanned the area nervously. "Do you see anyone?" she whispered. Liam shook his head, his eyes sharp as he searched for any sign of movement. "Stay close to me," he said softly, guiding her toward one of the larger warehouses. The message had given no specifics, but instinct told him that whoever had sent it would be nearby, watching. They didn't have to wait long. As they approached the entrance of the warehouse, a figure stepped out from the shadows. It was a man in his 50s, with graying hair and a worn, tired expression. He looked at them with a mix of curiosity and caution, his hands tucked into the pockets of his coat. "You're Liam Turner," the man said, his voice low, "and you must be Alice." "Who are you?" Liam asked, keeping his tone calm but firm. "Did you send the message?" The man nodded, stepping closer. "My name is Vincent. I knew your mother, Alice. I worked with her, back when everything started to fall apart." Alice's breath hitched. You knew my mom." "I did," Vincent said, his eyes softening. "She was a brave woman, too brave, maybe. When she found out what was happening, she tried to take them down, but she underestimated just how powerful they were. That's why she had to disappear." "Where is she?" Liam asked, cutting straight to the point. "We know she's alive. We need to find her." Vincent hesitated, glancing around as if making sure no one else was listening. "I don't know exactly where she is," he admitted, "but I know she's safe. I was one of the people who helped her escape. We made sure she had a way out, a new identity. After that, we lost contact. It was safer that way." "Why are you telling us this now?" Alice asked, her voice shaky. "If she's safe, why would you want us to find her?" "Because things have changed," Vincent said, his expression grave. "The people she was running from, they're on to her again. They found traces of her, and they're getting closer. If they find her, it'll be over. The only way to keep her safe now is to get her out, to make sure she's far away from their reach." Liam's mind raced, trying to process everything. "So you want us to help her escape again?" "Yes," Vincent said, "but there's more. The only reason they've been able to track her down is because someone inside the organization is leaking information. Someone who wants her dead." "Why?" Alice asked, horrified. "Why would they still be after her after all these years?" "Because she has something they need," Vincent explained. "She managed to take a copy of the records, proof of everything they were doing. Money laundering, illegal trades, all of it. They've been trying to find those records for years, and they think she still has them. If they get their hands on them, they can erase every trace of their crimes." Liam felt a chill run down his spine. "Where are the records now?" "They're hidden," Vincent said. "And only Elizabeth knows where. That's why they want her. She's the only one who can lead them to it. But if you find her first, you can help her destroy the evidence. Make sure it never falls into their hands." Alice's eyes filled with tears, and she took a step closer to Vincent. "Please, tell us where she is. We can protect her." Vincent hesitated, then pulled out a small piece of paper from his coat pocket. "There's a safe house in Savannah. This is the address. She was there the last time I had contact with her, but that was months ago. I don't know if she's still there, but it's the best place to start." Liam took the paper, his hands shaking slightly. "Thank you," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. "We'll find her." Vincent nodded, but there was a sadness in his eyes. "Be careful. If they catch wind that you're looking for her, they won't hesitate to come after you. And they play dirty." As they turned to leave, Liam heard the faintest sound, like a click, echoing through the still night air. He froze, his instincts screaming at him to move, but before he could react, a shot rang out, splitting the silence. Alice screamed, and Vincent staggered back, clutching his chest as he crumpled to the ground. "Get down!" Liam shouted, grabbing Alice and pulling her behind a stack of crates. His heart was pounding, but he forced himself to stay calm. He scanned the area, trying to spot the shooter, but the shadows were too deep, too still. "Vincent!" Alice cried, her voice breaking. "He's gone," Liam said, his voice tight with emotion. "We need to get out of here now." Keeping low, they made their way back to the car, their hearts racing. Liam's mind was a blur of panic and determination. Someone had been watching them, waiting for the right moment to strike. They had been warned, but he hadn't realized just how close the danger really was. As they sped away from the docks, Liam glanced at Alice, who was still shaking, tears streaming down her cheeks. "Are you okay?" he asked, his voice soft but urgent. She nodded, though her eyes were wide with fear. "We have to find her, Liam. We have to get to Savannah before they do." "We will," he promised, "but we need to be smart about it. No more direct approaches, no more risks. We're going to find her, but we're going to do it on our terms." The rest of the drive was silent, each of them lost in their own thoughts. Liam knew that they were running out of time, and that the stakes had just been raised to a new, terrifying level. But as long as there was a chance, no matter how small, he would fight to find Elizabeth and keep her safe. As they reached the edge of the city, Liam tightened his grip on the steering wheel, "Hold on, Elizabeth," he whispered. "We're coming." The journey to Savannah was tense, filled with a sense of urgency and dread. The address Vincent had given them was tucked away in a quiet, residential neighborhood, a small, unassuming house that blended in with the others around it. As they approached, Liam's heart pounded with anticipation. This could be it, the moment they had been fighting for, the moment they would finally find Elizabeth. "Are you ready?" Liam asked, glancing at Alice as they parked down the street. She took a deep breath, trying to steady herself. "I don't know, but I have to be." They made their way to the house, every step feeling heavier than the last. The quiet of the neighborhood was almost oppressive, as if the world itself was holding its breath. When they reached the door, Liam hesitated for a moment before knocking, the sound echoing in the still air. There was no immediate response. Liam knocked again, his heart sinking with each passing second. Just as he was about to turn away, the door creaked open, and a woman stood in the doorway, her face partially hidden in the shadows. For a moment, Liam couldn't breathe. It was as if time had rewound itself, and he was staring at a ghost from his past. "Elizabeth," he whispered, his voice barely audible. The woman stepped forward, and the light from the hallway illuminated her face. There was no mistaking it. The same eyes, the same gentle features, though aged by years of hardship and fear. "Liam," she said, her voice trembling with disbelief. "Is it really you?" Liam felt tears well up in his eyes as he took a step closer. "It's me. I've been looking for you. For so long." Elizabeth's gaze shifted, and her eyes fell on Alice, who was standing just behind Liam, her hands clasped tightly together. "Alice," she breathed, her voice breaking. "Oh my God, Alice." For a moment, there was only silence. Then Alice rushed forward, tears streaming down her face as she threw her arms around Elizabeth. "Mom," she sobbed, her voice choked with emotion. "I found you. I found you." Elizabeth held her daughter tightly, as if afraid to let go. "I'm so sorry," she whispered, her voice thick with years of unspoken pain. "I never wanted to leave you. I thought it was the only way to keep you safe." Liam watched the reunion, his heart swelling with a mix of joy and sorrow. He had imagined this moment so many times, but seeing it now, the reality was almost overwhelming. After everything, after all the lies and dangers, they were finally together. But there was still a lingering fear, a shadow that hadn't yet lifted. Elizabeth pulled back slightly, looking at Liam and Alice with a pained expression. "You shouldn't have come," she said softly. "It's not safe. If they know you're here, they'll come after you too." "We know," Liam said, his voice firm. "But we're not leaving without you. We're going to get you out of here, and we're going to make sure they can't hurt you, or anyone else, ever again." Elizabeth's eyes filled with tears as she shook her head. "Liam, you don't understand. They're powerful. They have connections everywhere. I've been hiding for so long because I knew the moment I tried to fight back, they would come for me." "We have to fight," Alice said, her voice steadier now. "We have the evidence you kept, don't we? The records. If we can get them to the authorities, we can take them down." Elizabeth hesitated, then nodded. "I hid them, in a storage unit outside the city. I knew if they ever caught up to me, those records would be my only leverage." "Then that's where we're going," Liam said. "We'll get the records, and we'll make sure they see the light of day. But first, we need to get you somewhere safe." As they made plans to leave, Elizabeth glanced around nervously, as if expecting someone to burst in at any moment. "I don't know how you found me," she said, looking at Liam. "But I'm glad you did. I thought I'd never see either of you again." Liam stepped closer, his expression soft. "I couldn't stop looking. I knew, deep down, that you were still out there, and I wasn't going to give up until I found you." The moment was interrupted by the sound of a car pulling up outside. Instinctively, Liam moved to the window, peering out cautiously. His heart dropped when he saw 2 black SUVs parked at the curb, men stepping out with purposeful strides. "They're here," he said, turning back to Elizabeth and Alice. "We need to go. Now." Panic flashed across Elizabeth's face, but she quickly regained her composure. "There's a back door," she said, her voice urgent. "We can slip out through the alley." They moved quickly, slipping out the back as quietly as they could. The alley was dark, and the only sounds were their footsteps and the distant hum of the city. Liam's mind was racing, trying to figure out how they could escape without drawing attention, but he knew they were running out of time. The men would soon realize they had fled, and when they did, there would be nowhere left to hide. As they reached the end of the alley, a familiar voice called out to them. "Over here." It was the private investigator, waiting beside a nondescript sedan, the engine running. "Get in!" Without hesitation, they piled into the car and the investigator sped off, leaving the men in black suits scrambling to follow. The car weaved through the streets, taking sharp turns and doubling back to lose their pursuers. Liam's heart was in his throat, but he forced himself to stay calm. This was their chance, and they had to make it count. "Where are we going?" Elizabeth asked, clutching Alice's hand tightly. "To the storage unit," Liam said. "We're getting the records, and then we're getting out of here." They reached the storage facility just outside the city limits, and Elizabeth led them to a small, unmarked unit. She unlocked it, revealing a plain metal box hidden beneath a tarp. "It's all here," she said, opening the box to reveal stacks of documents, along with a flash drive. Everything they didn't want the world to see. Liam picked up the flash drive, his hands shaking slightly. "This is it," he said. "This is how we end this." Before they could leave, headlights illuminated the storage unit, and they heard the screech of tires. Liam turned to see the black SUVs pulling up, blocking their exit. Men stepped out, their expressions cold and menacing, and Liam knew they had been cornered. "You need to run," Elizabeth said, her voice urgent. "Take the records and go. I'll distract them." "No," Alice said, her voice filled with determination. "We're not leaving you behind. Not again." Liam felt a surge of resolve as he stepped forward, holding the flash drive up. "You want this," he shouted to the men. "Come and get it." For a moment, there was a standoff, tension crackling in the air. Then, suddenly, police sirens blared, and squad cars surrounded the SUVs. The men froze, caught off guard as officers stepped out, weapons drawn. Liam's investigator stepped forward, a triumphant smile on his face. "I called in a few favors," he said to Liam. "Figured we could use some backup." The confrontation ended as quickly as it had begun. The men were arrested, and the evidence was taken into custody. Elizabeth, Alice, and Liam stood together, watching as the nightmare that had haunted them for so long was finally brought to an end. As dawn broke over the horizon, Elizabeth turned to Liam and Alice, her eyes filled with gratitude. "Thank you," she said softly, "for not giving up on me, for bringing me back." "We're a family," Alice said, her voice breaking. "That's what families do." Liam took Elizabeth's hand, holding it tightly. "We have a lot to catch up on," he said, smiling through his tears. "But we'll do it together. All of us." As they drove away from the storage facility, leaving the chaos behind, they felt a sense of peace that had eluded them for so long. The road ahead would not be easy, but they would face it together, ready to build a new beginning from the ashes of the past.